instead of cutting off entirely. Their consistency may look quiet, but it's deliberate. This is why reacting with pressure or emotional confrontation often backfires. It confirms their fear that closeness equals loss of freedom. But responding with steadiness, boundaries, and emotional calm allows them to feel safer over time. Safety is the gateway to vulnerability for an avoidant, not persuasion. Understanding this keynote shifts how you interpret their behavior. Distance doesn't automatically mean disinterest. Silence doesn't always mean indifference. For avoidance, love is not shown through constant reassurance or emotional intensity. It's shown through controlled presence, gradual trust, and the choice to stay connected even when closeness feels uncomfortable. Recognizing this doesn't mean tolerating neglect. It means reading behavior accurately, without panic or assumption. When you understand the internal conflict behind avoidant behavior, you stop personalizing their fear and start seeing the quiet signs of emotional attachment that were there all along. Their attachment doesn't move toward intensity, it moves toward control. This can be confusing because most people are taught that love looks like effort, chasing, or emotional expression. For an avoidant, those same behaviors feel unsafe and destabilizing. When an avoidant starts to care deeply, they don't suddenly become more expressive. Instead, they become more measured. They regulate their tone, their availability, and their emotional output. This restraint is not emotional coldness. It is a way of protecting both themselves and the connection. They fear that if emotions escalate too quickly, they'll lose the ability to manage their inner world. So they slow everything down. This is why avoidants rarely chase, even when they are emotionally invested. Chasing requires vulnerability. It requires admitting need. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, need feels like exposure. It feels like handing someone the power to disappoint or overwhelm them. So instead of moving toward you loudly, they stay nearby quietly. Presence replaces pursuit. You might notice that they don't initiate constantly, but they also don't vanish. They respond. They engage thoughtfully. They show up when it matters, even if they don't announce it dramatically. This is an important distinction. Disinterest is careless. Avoidant love is careful. Restraint also shows up in how they manage conflict. Rather than escalating emotions, they may withdraw temporarily to think, regulate, and regain composure. To someone unfamiliar with avoidant patterns, this looks like avoidance of the relationship itself. But internally, they are trying to preserve it without losing themselves in the process. What makes this challenging is that restraint doesn't feel reassuring to partners who value emotional expression. Silence can feel like rejection. Distance can feel like disconnection. But for an avoidant, restraint is a sign that the connection matters enough to be handled carefully. They don't treat insignificant connections with caution. They walk away from those. This keynote becomes clearer when you look at consistency over time. An avoidant who is not emotionally invested will disengage without hesitation. An avoidant who cares will maintain a steady, controlled presence. They may limit emotional intensity, but they don't sever the bond. They stay within reach. Understanding this changes how you interpret their behavior. Instead of asking, "Why aren't they chasing me?" the better question becomes, "Are they staying connected without pressure?" For avoidance, love doesn't shout. It stays, overwhelm, not to something you did wrong. Their distancing is less about rejecting the relationship and more about managing emotions they don't know how to process in real time. Avoidant individuals are highly sensitive to emotional intensity, even if they appear calm on the surface. When feelings deepen, their mind begins to anticipate future expectations, emotional demands, or loss of independence. This anticipation creates pressure long before anything actually happens. So their nervous system responds by creating space. Space gives them time to think, regulate, and regain a sense of control. This is why avoidant withdrawal often happens after moments of closeness. A meaningful conversation, shared vulnerability, or emotional connection can trigger their need to step back. From the outside, this timing feels confusing. It looks like mixed signals, but internally, closeness activated fear, not doubt. They didn't pull away because the moment wasn't good. They pulled away because it mattered. Another important detail is that avoidants rarely communicate this process clearly. Many don't have the language to explain what's happening inside them. They just know that they feel overwhelmed and that distance brings relief. This silence isn't meant to punish or confuse. It's a coping strategy they learned long before this relationship existed. What determines whether this withdrawal is a sign of love or disengagement is what happens next. Avoidants who are emotionally detached tend to stay gone. Avoidants who are attached come back once they feel regulated. They reappear calmly, often acting as if nothing dramatic happened. This can feel dismissive, but for them, the crisis was internal and already resolved. This pattern can be frustrating for partners who crave clarity. It's tempting to chase, demand reassurance, or push for emotional explanations. Unfortunately, that often increases the avoidant's stress and reinforces their fear that closeness leads to pressure. The more regulated and steady the response they receive, the safer they feel returning. Understanding this key note allows you to stop personalizing their withdrawal. It's not a measure of your worth or importance. It's a reflection of how they manage emotional intensity. When you recognize that their distance is about self-regulation, not rejection, you're better able to respond with boundaries instead of panic. Avoidant love doesn't disappear during distance. It pauses to breathe. And if the connection truly matters to them, they always find their way back once the emotional volume lowers. While many people associate love with frequent reassurance, deep emotional conversations, or visible effort, avoidants experience commitment in a much quieter way. For them, staying steady is more meaningful than being expressive. Avoidant individuals often struggle with emotional flooding. When feelings become too intense, they feel destabilized and lose their sense of internal balance. Because of this, they naturally limit emotional highs and lows. This doesn't mean they lack depth. It means they prefer emotional environments that feel manageable. Consistency provides that sense of safety. This is why an avoidant in love often shows up in predictable ways. They may not be overly romantic or verbally affirming, but they are reliable. They keep routines. They honor agreements. They maintain contact at a pace that feels sustainable. To someone who values emotional expression, this can feel underwhelming. But for an avoidant, this steady presence is intentional. One important distinction to make is between low effort and regulated effort. Low effort is careless and inconsistent. Regulated effort is controlled but reliable. Avoidants tend to fall into the second category when they care. They don't overpromise. They don't escalate quickly. Instead, they choose actions they know they can maintain without feeling trapped or overwhelmed. Consistency also shows up in how they handle boundaries. Avoidants often need clear limits to feel safe. When they respect your boundaries and expect you to respect theirs, it's not a lack of closeness. It's a way of ensuring the relationship remains stable. Emotional chaos feels threatening to them, so they unconsciously build structure to protect the bond. Over time, this consistency becomes a form of trust. They may not say much about their feelings, but they demonstrate them through repetition. They keep coming back. They don't disappear during uncertainty. They stay connected even when things feel emotionally uncomfortable. That choice matters more than intensity. Misunderstanding this key note often leads to unnecessary conflict. When consistency is dismissed as indifference, avoidants feel unappreciated and misunderstood. They may retreat further, reinforcing the very pattern their partner fears. Recognizing consistency as a sign of attachment allows space for mutual understanding instead of pressure. Avoidant love grows slowly. It deepens through routine, reliability, and emotional calm. If an avoidant continues to show up in the same steady way over time, that is not emotional distance. That is commitment expressed in the language they know best. This fear shapes almost every decision they make in relationships, especially when feelings deepen. It's not that they don't value closeness. It's that closeness to them has historically come with pressure, obligation, or emotional overload. Avoidant individuals learned early that relying too much on others could lead to disappointment or loss of control. As a result, independence became their emotional anchor. When they enter a relationship, they don't stop valuing connection, but they constantly monitor how close is too close. Love activates a quiet alarm inside them that asks, "Will I still be myself if this continues?" This is why avoidants may resist labels, expectations, or future-focused conversations, even when they care deeply. These things symbolize permanence and responsibility, not because they don't want them, but because they fear being consumed by them. The more emotionally meaningful the relationship becomes, the more they protect their sense of self. You may notice that an avoidant seeks space not to disconnect, but to reset. Time alone helps them remember who they are outside the relationship. This self-reconnection actually allows them to return more grounded. Without it, they feel suffocated, even in healthy dynamics. This is an internal experience, not a reflection of how demanding their partner is. What's important here is understanding intent versus impact. The intent behind their need for autonomy is self-preservation. The impact can feel like emotional distance. When this gap isn't understood, partners may respond with pressure, which only confirms the avoidance fear. Pressure feels like loss of freedom. Freedom is tied to emotional safety. Avoidants who are not invested choose independence over connection completely. Avoidants who are emotionally attached try to balance both. They don't leave. They adjust distance. They seek a rhythm that allows closeness without losing themselves. This balancing act is exhausting for them, even if it looks effortless from the outside. Respecting this keynote doesn't mean abandoning your own needs. It means recognizing that autonomy is not rejection. When an avoidant feels their independence is respected, they're more likely to relax into the relationship. Safety opens the door to vulnerability, not force. Love, for an avoidant, is not about merging lives quickly. It's about staying connected while remaining whole. When you see them protecting their autonomy but continuing to choose the connection, you're not witnessing avoidance. You're witnessing a careful, intentional form of love trying to survive without losing itself. While many people associate love with safety and emotional closeness, avoidants often feel exposed when they start to care deeply. Vulnerability doesn't register as warmth to them, it registers as risk. Avoidant individuals are used to managing life independently. They rely on logic, self-regulation, and emotional containment. When love enters the picture, it disrupts that system. Suddenly, someone else matters. Someone else has emotional impact. This loss of emotional neutrality feels unsettling. Even positive feelings can create anxiety because they introduce the possibility of loss. This is why avoidants may downplay emotions, avoid deep discussions, or intellectualize the relationship. It's not because they don't feel. It's because feeling without control is unfamiliar territory. Vulnerability forces them to confront needs they've spent years minimizing. That confrontation is uncomfortable, even when the relationship is healthy. You might notice that when an avoidant begins to open up, it happens slowly and selectively. They share in pieces, not all at once. They may test safety through small disclosures rather than big emotional reveals. This gradual exposure helps them stay regulated while still allowing connection to deepen. Another important aspect of this keynote is that avoidants often don't seek reassurance when they're vulnerable. Instead, they retreat. They process internally. To a partner, this can feel isolating, but internally, they're trying to stabilize emotions before re-engaging. They fear that showing too much will lead to expectations they can't meet. What signals love here is not how openly they express vulnerability, but that they allow it at all. Avoidants don't open emotionally with people they don't care about. If they're sharing fears, past experiences, or personal values, even in limited ways, that's meaningful. It indicates trust. Reacting calmly to these moments is crucial. Overreacting, pushing for more, or turning vulnerability into a demand can cause immediate shutdown. But responding with patience and emotional steadiness reinforces safety. Safety is what allows vulnerability to grow. Understanding this key note shifts expectations. Love doesn't always arrive as closeness. Sometimes it arrives as discomfort that someone is willing to sit with. For an avoidant, choosing to stay present despite vulnerability is an act of courage. It's not loud or dramatic, but it's deeply intentional. When you see an avoidant struggling with emotions, yet remaining connected, you're not witnessing emotional unavailability. You're witnessing someone learning to tolerate love without armor. Words make emotions permanent and exposed, while actions allow them to stay grounded and in control. Avoidant individuals tend to value practicality and reliability. They may struggle to articulate feelings because doing so requires emotional exposure without immediate structure. Saying how they feel can create internal pressure to maintain or escalate those feelings. Actions, on the other hand, feel safer. They can show care without opening emotional floodgates. This is why an avoidant might not say much about what you mean to them, but still make space for you in their life. They adjust schedules. They remember preferences. They help in practical ways. These behaviors are not accidental. They require effort and intentionality, even if they're delivered quietly. One common misunderstanding is assuming that silence means uncertainty. For avoidants, silence often means they are choosing stability over expression. They may believe that showing up consistently is more honest than making emotional statements they fear they can't sustain. In their mind, actions carry less risk than promises. This keynote becomes especially clear during challenging moments. Avoidants may not offer emotional reassurance verbally, but they stay present. They don't escalate conflict. They handle situations calmly. To someone who values verbal validation, this can feel emotionally empty. But for avoidance, staying regulated during difficulty is a form of care. It's also important to notice effort over performance. Avoidants rarely perform love. They don't exaggerate feelings or dramatize connection. If they are investing time, attention, or energy into the relationship, that investment is meaningful. They conserve emotional resources and don't waste them on connections that don't matter. Misreading this pattern can lead to frustration. When actions are overlooked because words are missing, avoidants may feel unseen. This can push them further into emotional restraint. Recognizing actions as communication helps bridge this gap. Understanding this key note doesn't mean ignoring your need for verbal reassurance. It means learning to translate behavior accurately. When an avoidant continues to show up, help, support, and remain involved without being asked, they are communicating attachment in the language they trust. For avoidance, love is rarely spoken loudly. It's built quietly through consistency, presence, and follow-through. If their actions continue to align with care over time, that alignment speaks louder than any declaration ever could. Love doesn't just create vulnerability for them, it also triggers a sense of responsibility they're not sure they can live up to. This inner conflict often goes unseen, but it shapes much of their behavior. Avoidant individuals often hold a strong self-image built around independence and emotional control. When they begin to care deeply, they worry about the impact of their limitations on someone else. They become aware that their need for space, emotional restraint, or silence might hurt the person they care about. This awareness creates guilt, not relief. Instead of addressing this guilt directly, avoidants tend to internalize it. They question whether they're capable of maintaining a healthy relationship. They may wonder if they're unfair to you or if staying connected will eventually lead to disappointment. These thoughts don't come from lack of care. They come from self-doubt. This is why avoidants sometimes hesitate even more once feelings deepen. They may pull back, not because they want distance, but because they feel undeserving of closeness. Guilt can be paralyzing. Rather than risking causing pain, they choose temporary withdrawal. In their mind, distance feels safer than failing emotionally. You might notice moments where they seem reflective, serious, or emotionally quiet. These are often signs of internal processing. They are weighing their feelings against their fears. Avoidants rarely rush into emotional decisions. When love is involved, they slow everything down, sometimes to a fault. What distinguishes guilt-driven withdrawal from disinterest is consistency. An avoidant who doesn't care won't wrestle internally. They won't reflect. They'll disengage cleanly. An avoidant who cares continues to struggle because the connection matters. The struggle itself is evidence of attachment. Responding to this dynamic requires patience and emotional steadiness. Interpreting guilt-driven distance as rejection increases their self-doubt. But calm presence and clear boundaries reduce pressure. It reassures them that connection doesn't require perfection. This keynote helps reframe silence and hesitation. It's not always avoidance. Sometimes it's someone confronting the weight of caring more than they expected. Avoidant love isn't free-flowing or effortless. It's cautious, thoughtful, and often burdened by responsibility. When an avoidant stays connected despite guilt and uncertainty, it's not because they're confused. It's because the connection means enough to wrestle with their fears instead of walking away.